Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're discussing Venture Smith, a truly remarkable figure in American history.
Venture's journey is one that demonstrates resilience and ultimately self liberation. Let's begin by discussing what we know about his early life.
Yeah, born in 1729 in a village known as Dukandra, which is located in West Africa, was a boy named Rotier Furrow.
Bertier's early life was marked by a lot of privilege as well as tragedy. He was born the first of three children to a prince, but his mother later fled to this village after his father married another woman. Here, Venture and two siblings, as well as his mother, traveled around 140 miles over just 4 days. They ended up at a farm, but their life was ultimately changed when their father came around a year later to retrieve them.
Just 6 weeks after Venture's return to the family farm, tragedy struck. The farm was invaded and his father was captured. His father was tortured and killed for refusing to reveal the location of his money.
These white missionaries came in and they knew that Brotier's father had money. They raided this village, and this was really traumatic for Brotier's early life. He saw his father tortured and killed in front of him. And immediately after this, both Brotier and his family were taken to the Golden Coast in modern-day Ghana, where Venture and his family were sold into slavery for 4 gallons of rum and a piece of calico. This is where Venture earned his name Venture, and his last name Smith would later be adopted from a future master by the name of Oliver Smith.
His first master was a man by the name of Robinson Mumfords. Under Mumford's ownership, Venture endured truly backbreaking labor and was also subject to severe punishments from the master and his master's son.
Venture was a really large man. He was usually described as at around 300 pounds and 6'2", which made him a candidate for a lot of severe labor.
In 1754, at the age of 22, he married another slave by the name of Margaret. They later had a daughter together named Hannah.
Venture was really determined to secure freedom for his family, and he saved money from outside sources, selling produce and investing a lot of his money as well. His path to freedom was filled with a lot of challenges, though. He was sold twice more and finally ended up in the hands of Captain Oliver Smith. And Smith was a more reasonable man, ultimately agreeing to allow Venture to actually purchase his own freedom.
Exactly. And by spring 1765, Venture had actually saved up enough money to purchase his freedom. He did this for 71 pounds and 2 shillings. This marked really just a turning point in his life. He had moved to Long Island in 1769.
Here, Venture cut wood and invested his earnings really wisely. This was a financially intelligent man. He finally was able to purchase his 2 sons by the name of Solomon and Cuff for around 200 pounds each. Unfortunately, Solomon fell ill with scurvy and later passed away.
But Venture wouldn't let this stop him. He kept on working and later was able to purchase his wife Margaret for an additional 40 pounds. At the time, Margaret was pregnant with an unborn baby who was Venture's child. Talk about a 2-for-1 deal. In this case, Venture bought 2 people for the price of 1, saving him money for the future and ultimately letting him be better prepared for what was to come.
Absolutely. His daughter Hannah, who was married, tragically fell ill after this and passed away. But in 1775, Venture was able to purchase a farm in Connecticut at Haddam Neck. This really marked the next chapter in his life.
Exactly. Over the next couple years, Venture's expanded his farm. Starting at 10 acres, he got it up to 130 acres by 1778 and made a living from fishing, farming, and trading along his farm.
This really embodied his resilience. Venture was able to go from nothing to this massive farm, working his way up. I think this really demonstrates Venture's inner motivations at the time.
Exactly, and after everything he went through, he was able to peacefully live the remainder of his life on this farm until he passed away in 1805.
Absolutely, but first let's understand who narrated this story, though, and how truthful those recollections really were. Venture Smith's narrative comes to us through a pretty complicated lens. His autobiography, which was penned in 1798, was written by a school teacher by the name of Alicia Niles.
Alicia Niles was a white man, educated and likely well-intentioned. However, we must acknowledge, what Venture went through. As an enslaved African American, he lived most of his life without knowing how to read or write. And when it came to sort of recalling his life story and all the experiences he went through so Alicia Niles could write it down, you really have to think sort of what was going through his mind, recalling all this and really just how tragic and how that was for him.
We need to understand the inherent power dynamics at play here. This man, Alicia Niles, as well-intentioned as he might have been, was a white school teacher, and Venture Smith was a former slave. We have to look and understand there may have been some filtering, whether consciously or unconsciously, how this story was shaped and ultimately told.
Exactly. I mean, it's crucial to consider the context of the time and the perspectives involved in the creation of such narratives.
I think we should move on to asking ourselves how honest were these recollections that Venture had? Like of many of these historical accounts, there might have been a lot of elements that were exaggerated or shaped due to the circumstances.
Exactly. We must remember that narratives like Venture Smith's were often shaped by the audience they were intended for. In this case, perhaps for abolitionists or just to share the story of his life, there was some filtering going on here.
But I don't think that detracts from the significance of his story. I mean, I think we need to still view this narrative as authentic and really powerful, despite viewing it through a more critical eye.
Exactly. Lastly, let's explore how Venture Smith conveyed a sense of soul value, sort of asserting his own self-worth amidst the dehumanizing effects of slavery.
I like to start with a quote from Venture's narrative itself. He stated, "I knew no man could work harder for freedom than myself, and I was resolved to be free or die." I mean, here, I think we can really see Venture's motivations at the time. I mean, this man was either going to buy his and his family's freedom, or he was going to die trying.
Exactly. I mean, this is the voice of a man who refused to be held down by, the horrors of enslavement. I mean, he truly embraced his own self-worth and freedom as he, once purchased himself and moved along in life.
I think this narrative was a real testament to this uncrushable human spirit. I mean, despite enduring enslavement, he refused over and over to let his spirit be crushed. I think a really good example of his assertion of his dignity is when this time his master came home from a trip and stole Venture's money, which he'd been saving to purchase his and his family's freedom. Instead of violence, Venture opted to take his master to court. And I'll read out a little quote from this part. "After the judge had endured his discourse with my master, he and his brother set out with me for home, one before and the other behind me. When they had come to a by-place, they both dismounted their respective horses and fell to beating me with great violence. I became enraged at this, and immediately turned them both under me, laid one across the other, and stamped both of them with my feet, for which I would."
I mean, you really have to think about what Venture was going through at the time. I mean, in a world where it was not good to be an African American, especially one that was free, he was really pushing the limits of sort of what he could do. I mean, taking his masters to court was one thing, but then also standing up to them when they tried to beat him afterwards, I mean, that's just something else.
Absolutely. I mean, slaves did not take their masters to court at this time. And aside from that, this was a real just expression of his resilience. I mean, he would not let these men humiliate him. When they beat him unjustly, he beat them right back. And I think that really just captures what Venture was like.
Exactly. I mean, it's really the type of person he was. And not even that, it really shows that he stood up for what was right and for what he believed in. I mean, he took his masters to court, he stood up for himself when he needed to, and then he also started his own life and, freed his children and wife and, started a family and a business as well. I mean, this shows who he was as a person, always striving to do better and stand up for what was right.
Absolutely. I think understanding the story and just the complexities and challenges that come along with it is really important when it comes to reading these slave narratives and understanding who Venture was and what drove him and how he ultimately became successful.
Exactly. We're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for listening, joining us. Stay tuned for our next podcast where we discuss the art history from this era. Thank you so much, and see you next time.